Good afternoon, Pirate Nation, and welcome to Are You Listening, a webcast podcast series brought to you in partnership from the wonderful people at Ford's Theater. On this episode of Are You Listening, we'll be joined by Ngwenya, who is the Chief of Staff for Councilmember Robert White. He'll be interviewed by one of our wonderful seniors here in Pirate Nation, Anne Huynh, who is a senior that's dual enrolled receiving college credits at UDC. Let's take a peek in their conversation. And once again, thank you so much for listening to Are You Listening in partnership with the wonderful people at Ford's Theater. Let's go.
Hi, Mintokufa. It's good to have you here for this live stream that we have going on. I am Anne Huynh, as you guys know, or Anne Huynh, as we pronounce my name. So first question to ask you, what led you to your career in city politics?
Sure. And thanks for having me. And I'm excited to be on this. Is it the StreamYard with Paul Public Charter School? So city politics actually found me. And I tell people all the time, I was in the tech space. So I worked for a small startup way back in the day. And then I actually joined a campaign for my current boss. But honestly, politics and activism run in my blood. And years ago, like in the 70s and 80s, my parents were super active in the apartheid movement, which was very similar to the Jim Crow movement in the United States, but this was happening in South Africa. And my parents were literally freedom fighters. So, making sure that justice for all people, for all oppressed people, is something that I've always focused on. So that's what led me to politics, specifically at the city council.
That's amazing. So second question that me and the school would like to ask you is, specifically, what is the best advice would you give to seniors who are currently going to be freshmen in college next year?
Yeah.
For them to major in criminology.
Just so I'm clear, what advice would I give to the seniors who are going to major in criminology?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, that was actually one of my degrees in undergrad. So criminology is literally the science or the studying of criminals, right? So it's like criminal science, and it's a social science, it's a behavioral science. And what I would say is to really absorb information so you know how people operate. If you know how criminals operate, if you know how police officers operate, if you know how people who have been impacted by the justice system operate, you can work in multiple careers. So for example, it's all about understanding the lowest common denominator. And what I mean by that is the people who were impacted the most by the policies that are implemented the most, people who are impacted the most by policies that are that maybe disproportionately, impacting them. So it's just like really understanding where people are coming from. So what I would say is basic things: study hard, and whatever studying means to you. College is really an access. It's a gateway to a larger network. But it's really just understanding what's happening in your school books. Talk to your teachers as much as possible, because in high school you meet with your professors or your high school teachers, maybe once, twice, 3 times a week, but in college it can be reduced. But talk to your college professors as much as possible, because if you go to a really big school, if they don't know you, they're really not going to care about you. So talk to them, let them know why you're passionate about criminal justice, and your pathways will really open up.
So, Mintokufa, if I pronounced that correctly,
yes.
During this pandemic, that we have currently going on, what has affected you and your job the most during that duration?
Yeah, really just the common touch, right? It's, human beings are tactile, and for those that may not know what tactile means, like that's not a word that I use every day, but it's like touch, right? We like to touch things, we like to see each other, we like to give handshakes, we like to give high fives, we like to, you talk to your friend like, oh, look how crazy he or she is. And in my workspace, it's the same thing, not being able to see my staff, see my boss on a regular basis. Like we're creating a new way of communicating, right? Like it's like we're on FaceTime all day long. Like that can also be draining because you probably, I don't know how often you use FaceTime or video chats, but just imagine, you've gone from seeing your friends every day, then everything now is on video. It's tough, and it's really hard to develop like solid connections with people virtually, in my opinion. But I think we're all trying to figure it out now. So that's been the toughest thing, really not being able to see my team and like gather and just like talk about how we're gonna take over the world.
So following up to what I've heard about you, you're very interested in like plantation, most if I'm not wrong. So what led you to collect and take care of plants, and what are some of the benefits that leads towards that?
Yeah, I mean, plants are, for me, like planting something means that you are believing in the future, right? So if you put a seed down, you believe that it's going to germinate. You believe that something is going to come from that seed, whether it's a plant, whether it's a flower, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable. So I come from a family of farmers. I come from a family of, so like my grandfather had a really large farm. He owned cattle. He owned, different types of livestock. Actually, both sides of my grandparents did. So it was almost like a green thumb. So I grew up in a house where there were like 100, 200, 300 plants in there at all times. And during the pandemic, I realized that, once the pandemic first hit, I realized that I wasn't really taking care of anything but my plants. So I used that to really show people that, if you're taking care of something, you're really putting yourself second or third. So, a point of like personal privilege. I don't have children, right? So like sometimes if a lot of folks, would circle around their parents, or they would circle around their kids during the pandemic. And I literally just realized how beneficial plants were, not only to like my physical space, but also my personal space and also my mental health. And I started sharing my plant experiences with people on social media, and it just boomed. And I realized that people were yearning for a connection to something, because the pandemic early on was really hectic for folks. I think we're all trying to figure it out now, but it's a lot different than it was, March 2020, right? Like we were, it's still a scary time, but at least now, people are getting vaccines, and people are, know how to go to school. People are going back to work, and so on and so forth. So things are changing a little bit.
So, with you being known as the council member of the as chief overall, so we have a very curious question. So, are you ready?
Yes.
Who has a better shoe collection, you or Mr. Clarkson?
So better is an adjective that I'm not sure I would use. We have a different type of shoe collection. So Mr. Clarkson has a eclectic, more diverse shoe collection. I collect like one or two kinds of shoes, right? I collect Jordan 1s. So like that's my favorite. That's my favorite sneaker, and I have too many Jordan 1s. So if Mr. Clarkson's collection was to stand up to my collection, his would probably be better. but I would probably have more Jordan ones than he would. So it all depends on what you think is best or not.
Oh God. But okay, I see how it goes. As in relation to you being a chief of staff of the council member team, when growing up, what did you originally want to be as a kid while you're growing up?
You know, I never had that dream as a kid. My parents raised me so different than the rest of my siblings. Like, I never was like, oh, I want to be a firefighter or I want to be a doctor. Like, I didn't even really play with toys. Like, I was just a different type of kid. I always just wanted to make an impact on folks. I always wanted to make a change. My parents always said that I was always very vocal, and I would be the kid to say like, oh, that you're not supposed to talk to me like that. Or, you know, I would tell the teachers that's not how you're really supposed to be teaching. So I guess to answer your question is I never had like a specific thing that I wanted to do. But I definitely I always wanted to make a difference. So I think I'm making a difference now, and I'm very excited about that.
That's good. So when being chief of staff, what specific economic issues did you encounter or experience while working in that role?
So one of the biggest things about being a chief of staff at the DC Council is like my job is very different from a lot of other government jobs. So DC is a city. It functions as a city, it functions as a state, it functions as a county. We also have some federal, DC has a lot of federal land. So we have a roughly $15 billion budget. So my office, the office that I work for Councilmember Robert White, we manage a, $15 billion budget. So there are some questions like, sometimes, people will call us and say, hey, I don't have a stop sign. But then we'll also figure out how to get more money into education for charter schools like Paul Public Charter School or DCPS. So it's so different, right? So like everyone always asks me, what does your day look like? I'm doing an interview today with Anne. Like that's not normal. That's something that's exciting. So the biggest economic issue that I can tell you is truly trying to understand how $15 billion works. $15 billion work, because like, I'm not sure if you've ever seen $15 billion in a room. I haven't. And just imagine trying to share that money out to all 700,000 residents in the city and all of the services that we do. So it's pretty cool.
I can see. So besides of that, how would you feel like your legacy overall being chief of staff throughout these many years? How would your legacy be remembered within the brown and black community?
Oh wow, that's an interesting question. So my first name Mtokufa actually means legacy that will never be forgotten. So I was named. So in my culture, in my tribe, names are very important and they dictate your future, right? So for me, when I got this job, September 16th, 2016, my goal was to be the best chief of staff that has ever been in the District of Columbia. So whenever I leave, I want to make sure that people say he made an impact on me. So with local government, I push my office, I push everybody on my team to make sure that they're writing legislation that impacts women, number one, that impacts the black and brown population, number two, and number three. And everything I do in that office is about equity. There's a big difference between equity and equality. And I want to make sure that people will always say he may not have been the nicest person, but he always did what was right for the people in the District of Columbia. Hopefully that's the legacy that I will leave.
So Do you have any questions specifically for Paul in general or students overall specifically?
Yeah. I'm always excited to hear, like, this is really innovative. So I guess, how many people are in like your class or your program that are doing these types of interviews, and do you think it's beneficial to your high school career, excuse me?
I think it's very beneficial overall, and plus being an Asian American young adult in this society to be considered an international high school for Paul Public Charter School, I feel like this would really benefit for any of those out there who are currently coming into Paul as freshmen, and to be able to feel comfortable with themselves and to know themselves, to find them overall, and to be able to build communication skills to be independent overall, as is our main focus at Paul.
Yeah. And do you think that you would want to continue to do interviews like this?
Yes, for those in the lower grades who have who wants to do interview as well, and as well as for anyone who's coming into Paul for interview. And yeah, it's something that I would do continuing on from this day.
Yeah. Were you nervous during this interview, or when you got picked, or? Okay.
I was at first, but knowing myself that I can be better than this, I learned to use my my tactic skills on like how to stay calm as possible, because eventually once after high school, there's going to be a similarity thing related to when doing job interviews or anything above that. So
Okay. Well, that's exciting. Well, look, like I said before, like you have a gift, and Miss Lewis Taylor and Mr. Clarkson saw that gift in you. So when people see a gift, like, step into it and just crush it. You're doing a great job. Doing a great job.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this inaugural episode of Are You Listening, in partnership with the wonderful people at Ford's Theater. I want to send a special thank you to, of course, Anne Huynh, Matukafa and Ngwenya, and of course Ford Theater as well, along with Paul Extended Day team led by, of course, Valerie Lewis Taylor. If you are interested in joining the podcast team here, please make sure that you contact Mr. Clarkson. His email, or my email, will show up right there. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we are so glad that you were listening, and we hope to hear you next time, or listen to us next time on Are You Listening? Have a great day.